think I've had a bit of a girl's crush on you since I interviewed you for Inspired about probably a year ago now. I just found it so hard to understand how someone could be so selfless as to go to a country that you've never been to before to help people that you've never met and put your own life at risk. So can you take us back to when Ebola broke out and what your thinking was behind why you should go?
When Ebola broke out, and we probably remember the fear, a lot of fear in Australia and in the world, and I was in Esperance, and Red Cross, who I'd previously done some work with, contacted, and they weren't getting many volunteers, or hardly any. I think there'd been two Australians to go previously in the very beginning in August when they set up their treatment centre in Sierra Leone. And so then I said yes in the phone call, and I was leaving that week, and Donald, my partner, was over in Blue Mountains because his mum was dying, so I didn't really get to talk to him. I've just said yes. So then my contracts come, and I need to get to Melbourne. Well, probably my contract hasn't come, but I need to get to Melbourne to sign the contract or something. And but on the way I just went to say goodbye to him. But the day I arrived, his mother died, so I didn't think that was a good time to let him know I was going. So then we were organising a funeral, and then I just kind of said, oh, we're just after this, I just need to go because I'm going to Sierra Leone. And Donald's a GP, so he was like, yeah, no, that's a really good idea. Now, whether he had secret agenda that I don't know about, but I believe he was answering from a global perspective.
Did anyone else get goosebumps all over?
Well, he's a bit like that. Secretly, he does homemade radios, and I think he just wanted to take over the home for a while, but never mind. Anyway, so then we said goodbye in Sydney, because he was still doing post-funeral stuff. And we both felt a little bit anxious, I think, at that moment, because I think the front page of that paper that day as I was leaving was the Red Cross Cairns nurse who came back and got a fever, and it turned out she had flu, but you know how fear was like this, and politicians got involved and all of that. So we said goodbye to each other thinking, he didn't think he'd see me again, and I didn't think I'd get back. So basically that's how I left, because I really wasn't quite sure what I was going to, basically. So I went to Geneva and had 2 days training after I left Melbourne, which my contract said if I broke my leg when I was over there, they could get me out. If I got Ebola, there's no way they can get me out. So that was the contract, and off I went for a month on the ground. So yeah, and then I arrived in Sierra Leone.
That just leaves me gobsmacked that you can do that and leave your partner and not know if you're going to return.
Yeah, but I think we're thinking it was the better thing to do from a global human perspective, to try and help rather than not do anything. Well, I was quite strong on that, because we did, especially for that Red Cross mission, we did get psychologically screened. I don't know how I got through, but
You must have been mad.
Yes, I think she kind of was like, the lady who was screening me was like, really? You're thinking like that? Yeah. Anyway, but perhaps you have to be mad, I don't know.
So, Anne, what was it like when you got there? Can you talk us through your first day?
Yeah, my first day was the 26th of October in 2014, and when I was being, orientated, and I was in the outfit, and I stepped into the treatment centre, and there was an English doctor showing me what he was doing, basically, so I was kind of following him around to keep safe. But there was a child who fitted, a little 2-week-old boy, so he fitted, and he then proceeded to bleed to death as I was holding him. So I think that was obviously very, very sad, but I think for me the big thing was his mother sitting there, and then she went on to say that was her 7th child, and her husband, they all died in this treatment centre, all from Ebola. So that was just, that changed everything in that hour. That was my first hour. So from then on, I just...
Did you say 7th child?
Seven. All her children died. So she really had nothing in the end to even live for, but she survived. And she was able to go home, if you can ever imagine anything like that. So I think that was really just a huge change, I think, for me to be confronted with that. And when people talk about when you come back and what you feel, and I didn't have any of that because I kept coming back to her, like that I would have no right to feel anything like after what she's gone through, like to come home and for me to cry when she's been through all of that just seemed to be silly, like to think that way. So I think kindness was the thing for me that kicked in more so, and I think to respond in that way to every single thing you met each day was the better thing to do, if I have explained that properly.
And so that's your first hour on your first day. What was a typical day there like? Could you talk us through what you did day by day?
The first month I was there, because it's you get a month's contract, because nobody really went back. Remembering the death rate was over 80%, so it was a huge death rate, and there was nowhere for people to go. That was the other thing, because they hadn't MSF, Doctors Without Borders, had set up a place about 2 hours away, and then for the whole country of Sierra Leone, and then this Red Cross centre. So there was only 2 treatment centres for the whole of Sierra Leone. So the people in the capital, when Ebola finally got to them, they would have had to travel 4 hours to get to us in an ambulance that wasn't air conditioned, and you weren't allowed to open up the windows. So you can imagine how horrible that would have been in a country in the time that I went, which was almost 100% humidity. And if you didn't have Ebola before you got in the ambulance, you would have had it at the end. And when you open up the ambulance, a lot of people didn't make that trip. So it was nursing care and supporting the local staff, and education, lots of education for the local staff, remembering they've never had this in their country before. And then, washing people, helping people to feed, because the weight loss was horrendous for them, because they only live for 7 days if they've got Ebola, and if they make it after 7 days, you have a really good feeling they're going to make it. And then medication if they've got other diseases along with Ebola. And then the burial, or the deaths and the burials was big part of it, considering that the death rate was so high in the beginning. Then when I went back at Christmas, I went back in a different position. So I was in charge of the Ebola treatment centre, only because I just knew a little bit more of what I was doing. I think that was so it was just managing lots of stuff and working with teams and that.
And so what were the numbers like? How many people were there at the treatment centre?
Working or
Both
patients?
Working and patients.
So we had a bed capacity for 60, which doesn't seem a lot, but that's quite a lot of people to manage, because you need 500 staff. So that's nurses, infection control team, which was quite big, and then you've got the burial team, which have to dig those graves, which in those heat conditions is enormous. And then the outreach team that do the surveillance and all of that. So it's quite a lot, and always education and that. Because remember, I don't know if you've read a lot about it, but you had to educate the population, because they were afraid to bring people to the treatment centres, which in the most important thing at the outbreak of the Ebola was letting people know that there was Ebola. So you had to isolate that person. So you really had to get the community to be involved in that, so they would help isolate that person. The person was willing to do it, because in the end it saves lives and safe burials. Because burying one person, and if you don't do it knowing what Ebola is, you can create 40 new contacts from that one burial. And then you can imagine the repercussions.
People likely to hide a family member at
hide. Yeah, in the beginning, because they didn't understand it, and you know, you've got a lot of some witchcraft in the country, so they were also thinking the spray we used was Ebola. I mean, and what are we doing dressed in this outfit? You know, I can understand it. Yeah, they were afraid.
So what were the precautions for you to stay safe dealing with these people one-on-one?
Oh, well, you always, if people were in the treatment center, so they're in there because they either have Ebola or they're suspected, so you would always be suited.
So what did that involve?
You've probably seen the pictures looking like a space outfit. So it's lots of layers, and hopefully if we ever have another outbreak, it will be simplified by now, because we've never had one so long where we've learned so much. So it's lots of layers. So you've got your scrubs underneath, and then you've got your, what do you call it, like stepping into a suit. Can't think of a simpler word, but stepping overalls, thank you. And then the layer after that is the apron, and then your headgear goes over the top, and then your goggles, and then your mask, and then your triple gloves. It's normally double gloves, but in this population that we had, the local staff were really scared, so we did triple to go with it, safer, and then your gumboots. And everything got disposed of except for your gumboots and your goggles. They got soaked in the chlorine. So to get dressed, it's 20 minutes to get undressed, because now you're contaminated with the virus. So you have to spray every layer that you take off, and that's all gets burnt. But if you got a splash in your eye, you'd have to go home. You'd have to leave the country straight away, because you've only got you've got over 48 hours, 3 days before you get a fever. If you're going to be, you're exposed at that point with the splash, so you've got 3 days to get somewhere to before you get a fever, which you can't spread anything with a fever, but then the rest follows, all the droplets. And the huge thing is vomiting and diarrhea, where the weight loss comes in. And then
so dealing with that on a daily basis just must have been horrific. How did you cope? How did you keep going back there day after day?
Well, I think it's just that you're trying to help make a difference to people and families and that, because remember, Ebola didn't discriminate. It just took everybody, and families were lost in the whole thing. So you just went back every day. You know, while you were there, there was quite a lot to do on that. Yeah. The weight loss was great. I'm a celiac as well, so I found I struggled in that first month, because the food I couldn't eat a lot of the food and that. So, but that was great. Not that it's hurt me in any way, but it was a great weight loss program. Yeah. So, but that's nothing compared to the suffering that was on the ground for people and that. And then by late December, beginning of January 15, we came into the recovery phase. Whereas earlier was predicted millions of people would be lost, remember that? So it didn't, because I think more countries came on board. So initially you just didn't have enough people on the ground to do all the stuff you needed to do. But then, so the countries that were really great were Spain and Norway. Norway used the aircrafts to bring in a lot of the equipment, which is Estonia was the country that donated, small little country, 500,000 PPE outfits, the space outfits, and Norway brought them in. And then France, Spain, France, then later on New Zealand, England, Canada, Australia. When you've read it all, Australia had too much, as the world had a lot of fear, but Australia stayed with that fear a long time. So really, when you reflect back what Australia did, we didn't really do much because we were too afraid.
Can you tell us about, I know when you started you did that first month and then you came back, and that was pretty traumatic for you as well.
Oh, I don't know if it was traumatic. It was just a bit difficult because I came back and Donald was trying to negotiate, because I can see I wasn't able to go back to Esperance, because if I had got Ebola in the quarantine period, or you know, the incubation period of the disease, it wasn't a quarantine because I didn't have it, but Esperance was probably be hard for a plane to get in that was coming from Canberra, because it needed all that, you know, one of those wrapped up planes basically if I had Ebola, and you can imagine the hysteria and that. So it was better to stay in Perth, and Charles Gardner was the hospital allocated. So we were hoping to rent a place, but the health department wouldn't let us do that. And so then, you know, infectious diseases, CD isn't it? In initials, yeah. So they thought to put me next to Royal Perth, and it used to be an old accommodation for the doctors, I think. And when I got there, after having it explained to me, when I got taken out at the airport into a room and all of that communication that they would have had to do, but I couldn't actually lock the door of the accommodation, and the washing machine was broke and the stove didn't work and things like that. But what they used it for, which wasn't hard for me, but what they used it for was people from the country who needed organ transplants. That's where they were situated. So it was quite disgusting where the people were put. So because I was thinking that was really bad, I wrote a maintenance list. And then the CDC people made the mistake of asking me to give a talk while I was there. So, and then Donald was meant to be joining me, and I thought and he got sick with the flu, so it wasn't a good idea to come to me in case I got a fever. So he stayed away for a couple of days, but by the third day, I really couldn't stay there because there was lots of ambulances outside and people who were intoxicated making lots of noise, and I really couldn't sleep very well, so I'm not really quite sure why they thought that would be good for me. So I rang the head, Paul Armstrong, who was the head, and said, I'm leaving today because I just don't understand why you would have thought that was good for me. And because I thought, they're probably going to not pay for anything. So I took that on myself, and I said I'd find something, and they said just make sure you tell the accommodation place wherever you choose where you've been. So I did that, and I found it a little bit difficult to get someone to take me in. Anyway, finally I got a cabin out in Joondalup, which was perfect because I had Donald, and Donald was bringing the dog, so that was perfect, and that guy was lovely. But then I prepared the talk and went back, but at the end of the talk I told them the accommodation, and this was the list of maintenance, and which was really hard for people who need organ transplants. I can't get my head around that still. So anyway, so I'm hoping that got fixed up a little bit for them, and I think Paul Armstrong was looking at me going, anyway. But then I was going back. I got confirmation during that time that I was going back. So on the 18th day, I needed some malaria medication to go back with, so I had to go back into the travel doctor. So I made the appointment, remembering that I don't have Ebola. So 18th day, I ticked it off because I thought I'd better do the right thing. So CDC, yes, that was good, that I could do that, and Red Cross. So I went in, made the appointment, and they rang the morning of the appointment. They've had a special meeting now because I was coming to their practice, and they can't have me inside the building. They've had a special meeting with the director, and I'm not allowed inside because it's too much of a risk, and So how does it work though? So it's 3 days. If you don't show any signs of having Ebola within 3 days, then you're clear? Oh no, you have to wait the 21 days of the incubation. Okay. But in the 3 days, if I had got a fever, I'm in Perth, I would have got myself to Charlie's.
And so if you're treated within those
well, you go on to get Ebola and that, but I might have had a flu from the fever. I mightn't have had Ebola, but I didn't have Ebola and I didn't get a fever. And I then thought, okay, so I travelled from Joondalup on a train. When I got to Perth, I had a coffee in a cafe, because you're allowed to do these things, and then made my way to the arcade, which has the practice in it, and rang, which was my instructions, and they came to the door and they looked around, and they had and they threw the medication onto the pavement in front of me. So I bowed gracefully, picked it up, walked back through the streets of Perth and got back. But was very grateful I got the malaria medication. So it's not really, it's just showing you how health professionals, these were health professionals, like because of fear, they were paralyzed by fear. Like, and these are the people who technically should have understood the disease. So it just goes to show you in society how we're paralyzed, and we still even are now, like in the world, and by fear.
I would love the media to get hold of you in June, like with your dog, and the dog could have had Ebola.
Yeah, like the Spanish, yeah, the dog got put down. But it wouldn't have, because I would have got it first, but yes. Anyway, that didn't happen. I didn't get Ebola, and I went back, and I got there about 22nd of December and just stayed on then, because it was just too hard coming back again.
So what was the public reaction though to you?
Oh, I think on Facebook, remember it was fear, and on Facebook it was like, you better watch it, lady, and you know, all those comments people make when they're afraid, and you know, don't bring that back, and you shouldn't have come back, and all of those things. But then next time I came back was different, like, because I stayed and came back in April 15. So then it was like, it was better, I think.
People understood more about.
Well, people still avoided you in the supermarket in Esperance and walked across the street when they saw you, but there was a different perception, wasn't there? Like, because there was the maggot, you know, 60 Minutes had done something, and somebody, so it wasn't like you were totally bad.
When you came back?
I wasn't a hero, but I was kind of getting there.
Yeah.
I was getting there. You know, because it takes time for people, and I wasn't.
3 months.
Yeah.
Sure that you're
Yes. And my partner's a GP, and people would ring up for an appointment, and yeah, well, there's one available today. Oh no, we won't take it yet. We'll wait another 3 months, because he's the partner of her. So he might have Ebola that he could give these guys who come and see him. So they didn't come, and some people didn't come and see him, who knew, you know, the thinking process.
And what made you go back? You were there for a month and you came home. Why did you go back again?
Well, I had time because I was going through a grievance with the local hospital, and I had time. And Christmas, I felt, was about time and giving, and I had time, and I gave it. So, and I stayed then because I knew what I was doing, and there was like, I was only meant to stay another month, but they, you know, it was a lot happened in that month, and they were a bit short again, and I just extended, basically.
How long did that outbreak go for? How long
A year.
A year.
Yeah.
So they're coming to the recovery.
Yeah, a year.
West Australian is still there.
I was the only Western Australian. Out of Australia, from Red Cross, there are probably only four. And then remember Abbott, Tony Abbott, you know, all that money, and it was taken away, and there was talk of that place being built in Sierra Leone, and yes and no, and yes and no, and then finally the British and Australians got together, but they built it, but it was too late. It was coming into the recovery stage. Money was spent on that in Freetown, the capital, but they would never have filled it, whereas they needed that back in July.
And are there any cases that stand out in your mind of people that you met, or?
Yes, I was like the first hour, obviously, with the little child, and then with the 16-year-old boy who came with his family from Freetown. So his father was a GP or a doctor, was helping people, and contracted the disease and died, and gave it to his wife, his mother, and two sons. So they came, and the 16-year-old boy was quite sick when he came, and he was really, really scared. So when I came out of the suit, remembering you get really hot in the suit, so it's 46 degrees when you're inside the suit, so you lose a lot of fluid, which is probably why you lose a bit of weight and that. And I stayed out for about 20 minutes and got back again, and went back in and sat with him for another 40 minutes, just because he was quite scared during that time, and told him, you know, who I was, and if you could fight it and that. But he died and that, and I did get quite upset about that. And I was telling Kelly this morning that I've been telling, you know, doing nice talks around the country on the courage to be kind and that. And I said to Donald at the end of last year, I don't want him to die anymore in the story, like, because you know, he died. And then the other person, later on, you'll probably see a photo, is little Bella. I don't know if you've seen that photo of little baby. She was Bella, and her mother got Ebola, and she was 4 months, I think, Bella. And she didn't have it, but when you have to stop breastfeeding when you've got Ebola, so remembering she's still being breastfed, Bella, so she had to stop it, and she's in the high risk category, so we really have to wait 21 days with her because she's a suspect. So she's in this great big tent all by herself as a baby, and because you know the malaria is quite bad and dengue is bad and everything's bad, and so we didn't have a mosquito net that was good for her, you know, because I'm coming from Australia with SIDS and all of this, so I didn't want her to get wrapped up in one of the big ones. So I went to the local market and got a cake decorator, you know, the cake protector things, and came back, and I thought, oh, isn't this great, and cardboard box, and put that over her, and so she didn't get bitten, and like, but she was just absolutely gorgeous, Bella, and just went on, and every time you went in, you always had a suit on, and because you had to go in every 4 hours and feed her by bottle and that, but she hardly ever cried, and she would just laugh at you. And see, you know, Shima, the outfit. Anyway, so she went on not to get Ebola, and then her mother lived, survived, and then they were joined together, obviously, and waited another 21 days just in case she did get it or something. But anyway, they both made it, which was really nice. And then when I went back, so that was in my first rotator, and when I went back, I rang Mum, because Freetown was just in the middle of an outbreak, so I couldn't travel to see her, but I did ring her, and she was well, and baby was well, and so that was nice. But the doctors, when I was there, said, Anne, you don't, you know, every baby baby previous to that died. So they said you shouldn't really hang your hopes, but you had to talk to her, don't get Ebola, and she would just laugh at you. Anyway, she was cute.
Well, you mentioned before that so much of it was about just being with people and sitting beside them and, I don't know, holding their hand. But you're in this suit as well. How's that? What kind of dynamics is that?
Well, the only thing they had was your eyes, really, because they didn't have anything else. So it's quite hard. It's very hard, and obviously you can't stay too long. You can only stay an hour in there, because otherwise you collapse, and you know then you're exposed
from
and
the
that.
heat of the suit.
Yeah. So in that hour you've got your things to do. So you can't always be there when somebody's dying, because you don't know they're dying, and they die very quickly for some people. Like they're well talking and then they die. But then I think in other ways, imagine. I don't know what it'd be like if you didn't have the suit, because you'd be in all the time, and I don't know mentally if you could cope with that much death. You know, maybe the suit was a way to protect your heart or something. I don't know. I don't know what that'd be like sitting all the time. Yeah. So I don't know. You'd go back out in, but you had an hour.
Wow.
Can I ask a question? When you go in and out, you have to change your suit each time?
Yeah, no, you had to, yeah. Because you couldn't go, so you're in the high risk area.
Yeah.
So the outside you were in your scrubs in the low risk area. So always when you're inside, and then you have to take it all off and then put a whole new fresh lot on.
So there's 500 staff, and every hour they have to do that. So that's a lot of PPEs that needed to be provided. And did you say only one country provided that?
No, well initially Estonia only provided,
And Australia didn't provide anything like that?
No. And then not till later on when they built that place, because Australia was really very fearful. And the thing that changed the outbreak was there was an American doctor who got Ebola, and he was white. And that changed the course of the whole thing. Because it was like, oh, we've got it in our country.
Sierra Leone, who cares? We can leave a country to die. I think that was
well, don't you think we thought about that as a world? Because we didn't, we wanted to protect ourselves all the time. And a lot of countries, but a lot of countries stood up to Ebola and went in and helped. And, you know, it's quite inspiring that they did that. And, you know, they can hold their heads high that they did that.
Yes.
But
was going to say, do you think there's anything positive to have come out of it? Like, if any lessons that you learned, or?
Yeah, well, there's so much that's positive, like countries around the world, people gathered and went, and local staff, local staff who lost families went in and helped. You know, they had stopped universities, stopped work, and stopped schools. So even if you weren't a trained nurse, you know, obviously nurses had to be trained to be nurses, but then others who weren't burial teams, like they came and learned what to do, so they joined. Or if they survived Ebola, then they went back and looked after the orphans. So teams, and then of course when you come to that lovely recovery stage, you had survivors, which in the beginning was very far. They didn't know, so that's why they looked after the children, the orphans who didn't have Ebola till family was found. There was 10,000 orphans in Sierra Leone.
Oh, wow.
So we hadn't, you know, when they didn't have Ebola, it was hard to know what to do with orphans till you found somewhere for them, because you couldn't just put them on the streets and that. So we had to look after the orphans until they were found.
Yeah.
In Sierra Leone, in communities.
Australia built that was no good at the time?
No, they I'm not saying it was no good, but it didn't come at the right time. So the orphans have, with UNICEF joined later into the recovery, and they got placed in communities, like for communities to enfold them into all of that. Yeah.
And so, Anne, after you come back and you won the West Australian of the Year award, and you've used that platform to talk about having the courage to be kind.
Yes.
And you liken Ebola to a bully that required the courage to be kind to overcome it. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think like bullies, Ebola was like that. Like it just went and did things to people that it had no right to do to people. Like, and I think bullies do that. And then, like in the bully situation, when a person is being bullied, other people walk away because they're afraid. And I think as countries we did that till we got it together a bit more. Yeah, so that's what I liken that to, because I was bullied quite badly at the Esperance Hospital by a manager. I was a manager and a midwife and a nurse, and I was targeted quite badly during my last 2 years because there was a change of, there was a new role for a management person who for some reason I got targeted, and because I trusted in the integrity of the system, shows you how mad I am now, doesn't it? Believing there was integrity, but in going through the process and putting in the grievance, I realized that there's no use having faith in some times in life in the integrity, because I didn't have any. So then I went through this whole grievance process and went off to Ebola, which was much easier for me than going through what I did at the hospital. And then it was investigated by external investigators, and it was found to be substantiated that I was consistently bullied. But the apology didn't come from WACS, because that's who I worked for. So I resigned when I was over in February over in Ebola country, because I couldn't kind of work out what else to do, because you're kind of backed in a corner, aren't you? And you've got, like, the union doesn't help, and WorkSafe doesn't help, and that doesn't, so you don't really know what you're meant to do. So I thought if I ever had a chance to help people, because by then I realized, you know, it wasn't me, and I haven't gone through the worst of it. And then I began to unravel that there's so many people who suffer in healthcare, because that's what I focused on, and so many suicides, and I think patient care decreases, it becomes unsafe. So I've done quite a lot of research, and I thought if I ever got the opportunity, so that's what I did along with receiving Western Australian of the Year. I just thought I'd stand up on that platform and try and break it down a little bit, which I think has been quite good to do.
And the other cause that you mentioned was discrimination against refugees. What?
Yeah.
Say that?
So I just thought, yeah, the bullying thing took off first, so it was a bit hard to do both at the same time. But I do think I was an immigrant when I came from Ireland. We came quite young. I came quite young. with a family of 7, and we were quite poor and all of that. So I always feel for people who have come to this country as refugees, and I've also worked in war zones, and I felt as a family it was a little bit hard for us, but nothing in compared to people who've come trying to escape war, and all they want is somewhere to come to, and peace and safety. And I just think I don't understand why we can't get it, because if we were all attacked and needed to be refugees, we would like someone to help us. But in actual fact, I wouldn't blame them if they didn't, really, because we haven't done a lot to help refugees, or we seem to have that whole big thing about them being criminals instead of people who are fleeing. Knowing that there are people who aren't good, but we have that in everything.
And what about for everyday people, and how can we have the courage to be kind? What can we do to put more kindness into the world?
Well, I don't think you have to go anywhere. You just have to be part of your community, which is part of the global effort of being part of the planet. And I think we sometimes think we've got a government and they're doing well and we don't need to do anything, or they're just doing what they need to do. But that's probably a wrong way of thinking, because it doesn't get you anywhere, because sometimes the government doesn't do the right things. So, and in our past, we can see we've had people who have, with the courage to be kind, wanted to create a kinder society. So we've ended slavery, not totally in the world, but there's been a big effort to bring that to an end, and we've brought free education. Well, in Australia, there's education available for people, and especially to poor people, and healthcare and that. And I just think, and votes for women, look at that huge struggle and that's creating a kinder society. So I think we have to question when people say, oh, that's just a bully at work and they're always like that. I don't think we should just shrug our shoulders. We should say, no, but that's not good enough. Or if there's refugees and somebody is yet again talking about them in not a nice way, that's not good enough anymore. We have to try, especially in our world today, because there's so much fear. It's not good enough, and we need courage to speak up against it, and we need to be kinder to people. And I believe it's the way to help change the world, especially the world we're in at the moment. So.
Beautiful way to change the world. I love that.
Yeah.
And I think what we're talking about this morning about there's this, it's very easy to see the difference between good and bad, but there's that in between line where you just choose not to take a stance, or you just close your ears and I think that's what you're saying, to have the courage to not do that and stand up and say, no, that's not right.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So I've actually got some photos, a few photos that from Anne's time in Sierra Leone. I'm hoping she can talk us through, and then I'll just open up for some more questions, so we can have a bit more of a chat. But we'll just get out of the way to start with. You can stay a little bit out there, Anne, so you can talk us through.
So that was the treatment center. Sorry, that was the treatment center. The Red Cross treatment center in Sierra Leone. Kenema was the first place I went to, and then when I went back in December, they had a big outbreak 4 hours away, Kona. So I also went there. So it was good to go to both areas. So that was just the entrance.
So that's it was literally tents and
all tents, big rub hole tents. For the
So the whole treatment place was temporary.
Yes, because at the end, you wanted something, because I had Ebola, to destroy everything.
Awesome.
So that's Bella, that's little Bella, who was only so many months old, and so she was beautiful.
And so where are you there?
Oh, this is the high risk area. So, you had, let me just see if I can remember, suspected and confirmed and probable. That's right. And she was in the probable because she had a mother who had Ebola and she was breastfeeding, Bella.
Is there a fence separating those three areas, or does it have plastic walls? Or
No, just that orange fence thing, and that separated the low risk to the high risk, because in the very beginning of Ebola they had big fenced off completely, so relatives, if they couldn't see, so you couldn't see inside and you couldn't see people, so people believed that we as white people were taking people in and taking their organs. So
Can't believe so many years ago.
yeah. So this is the graveyard, which was a lovely memorial, I must say, to people. Before Red Cross got involved, people were put in mass graves with no identification, or in Liberia they were burnt. But we worked with Christians and Muslims, so it's not a good thing to do for bodies who are of the Muslim religion, because that's not what they believe in. So to get people on board, you can't do things like that. You have to work with the community. So the graves, we were always digging in the beginning, but they're beautifully marked. And when you go around, it's hard, because the young is 6 months or 2 years, and then the other age group. So there's a lot of people buried there. And this is the high risk area. So everything they come in with is burned, so they never go back out with those clothes. So then they're given clothes at the end, and they're given transport home and some money and a certificate to say they're free of Ebola, which accepts them back into their community. At the very beginning, people didn't believe that they were free of it, so they'd never be welcomed back. So that's the fence there, that's the separation. So if you had to hand something over the fence, so I'm now in my scrubs, you hand something you really loved, and you just putting on a table, there's tables there, and then you step back while the person with either Ebola or suspected Ebola removes that item. Yeah? And then that's with the local workers, and this is obviously in the tent that you're getting dressed in. So you always got someone to help you get dressed, because if you got it wrong, because you can't show any of your skin. So you have to cover completely, and if you walked in and your goggles, you know how like in the swimming pool they might fog up, you come out immediately because you can't see, and then coming out is the same. You have to have somebody spraying you down, but you have to follow their instructions, because now you've been in for an hour and it's 46 degrees and you've lost so much fluid, so you're a little bit not quite delirious, but you're heading that way and so you have to follow instructions. So if you get it wrong, it has to come off in an order. And that's a young man who made it, but they get really, really sick. I don't take horrible photos, so. And then always when you go in, you have to have your name, because the only thing people can see on the outside is you in the suit, but your name. And then you write your time on your sleeve, so you know when you go in. Because, it's a bit hard when you're in there, because it's too hot.
Okay, I think that's it. Okay, now, just a little bit of time before we have some lunch. Does anyone have any questions for Anne that they'd like to ask before we have some lunch? Otherwise, we can ask them over lunch.
I'm thinking about when you come back and you're living in Australia, it's a country that hasn't given any help. How do you feel about coming back to live in a country that doesn't initially help these people?
No, they didn't give not any help, but Australia was quite fearful, so I think it makes you think. No, I just think it's really nice to go and talk about the courage to be kind, to educate. And I think the amount of talks I've done, and then people feel, if we hadn't known that, but it's not the people's fault, it's the fault of the politicians or the health department. They should have had something to explain and educate people about Ebola.
Have you talked to the government?
I've talked to parts of governments. The health departments don't invite me in. I mean, as far as I'm aware that I'm blacklisted from the Western Australia Health Department, so I wouldn't be able to get a job in Western Australia Health Department.
Excuse me, is that because of that bullying issue?
Yes,
Or because
yes.
of Ebola?
No, bullying,
Yeah.
because I've spoken out. And we know that if people speak out, their life becomes worse. But anyway, I've spoken out, and I was lucky because I had a little bit of a platform, and you know, it's a bit hard winning a cup. You know, before that was Pride of Australia, I think an award, and then if I talk about bullying, if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have been able to talk about it. So it's been a good thing to have it. Just for that reason, but I'm very proud of myself that I'm blacklisted. It's bigger than the Western Australian, I think. But I'm trying to find that information out with freedom of information, because I can't really say that officially in media, because I don't have it as a hard copy anywhere. But I'll hope to get it. So no, I don't. I just think we just need to be kind to each other, because people, populations didn't know why the politicians do it. You know, it's always either about votes or money, and health departments do it, you know, because they don't want to be scared.
That, because many people do come back or do then hold a grudge or a pain or an ache or a feeling, like a sense of unable to work with those people, and then you come back and you're positively.
Well, I think, yeah.
So I think it's
And remember, in the very beginning, it was only such a few countries, and then, you know, people were able to help, and the stories that have come out afterwards, and people have done quite a lot of work, and we learnt a lot in it. Like, whereas MSF, Doctors Without Borders, always handled those outbreaks, and it was only a 2-week period, and they turned it around, but this was huge. So there wasn't anything ever like it before. Yeah, you know.
Would there be something like it again, do you think? Would there be?
Well, I think there possibly could be, because there's wars and poverty. But I think the little bags that everybody's got packed now and all that information, it would never last as long. That's what I believe. And there's a vaccine. There was a vaccine at the time, but it was in America, and it was what am I trying to think? In war, you know, you can use the chemical as a chemical weapon. So America had the Ebola vaccine, but they should have been ready to use it possibly, but they didn't have now consents. Like, we're in the middle of the big outbreak, they hadn't got all the consents done and the workup for it, so it couldn't have been used, but it would have been ideal, and that was only found out through this. So now with the next one, they have the vaccine ready, and they've already got a vaccine they've been using on health professionals now. Yeah. And if you were pregnant at the beginning of the outbreak, nobody would survive that. So that was really hard, like the baby and the mother would die. Like, they didn't have a chance at all. But if you got in early enough, if you weren't pregnant, if you got in early enough to the treatment centre, and we were able to start fluids, and that helped turn it around. But in the beginning, people came too late because they were scared, and everybody died.
And looking around this room, where it's all women in this room,
Yes.
do you find that maybe women are more likely to, we're the ones who are realising that the world has become unkind and we don't like it, and we would like to make the change, because it just seems obvious to me that. What do you think? Like, I just can't help but feel that, you know.
Well, there seems to be a big movement, doesn't there, around the world with women at the moment. Well, in regards to Trump, like I was thinking, because you seem to hear it a lot. But then maybe, I'm not saying women don't work, but a lot of the men work, don't they? And we've got that opportunity at 12 o'clock. I'm not saying nobody works, but like just that balance, life balance. Yes, but I think there is something. Well, why can't we change the world?
I think we can.
Yes, lovely.
No, I think, but it seems...
She's on to you. She's your local change the world person.
Yeah, I think it seems that women do naturally want to change the world. We don't see it
Yeah.
the way that men see it. Not that not all men see it.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
Many men are kind.
Yeah, but women think
But women
differently,
maybe
yeah.
act on it or want to know more about it. And I mean, I'm on my lunch break, so men can have a lunch break.
Yes, yes.
You know.
Speaking of lunch breaks, I feel like I could talk to you all day, but I am conscious that some people
Oh,
are
yes,
on their lunch
let's
breaks,
lunch.
and I want to be able to feed you. So please hang around and continue asking questions, but eat at the same time.
Thank
And
you
if you
very
do need
much.
to run, feel free to grab a bowl and take it with you, because yeah.
Thank you.